The Epic of Gilgamesh is the world's oldest surviving work of literature. The story comes from ancient Mesopotamia, and this was in the greater region which saw the birth of agriculture and the emergence of the first cities on Earth. We have existing texts written on clay tablets in the Akkadian language using cuneiform script stretching back some 4,000 years, with evidence of the tale going back even earlier in the Sumerian language from the earliest Mesopotamian civilization. The epic tells of Gilgamesh, the young king of Uruk, a great walled city, which Gilgamesh ruled without wisdom, without prudence, in a reckless, self-serving fashion, abusing men and women alike. And he was driving his subjects to cry out to the gods for assistance from his tyranny. Responding to their prayers, the gods created Enkidu, a sort of primal human being whom they placed in the wilderness, in the natural environment beyond the city, beyond the cultivated agricultural land. Enkidu was naked, apart from the covering provided by his long hair. He lived and he ran with and he protected the wild animals, freeing them from the traps which were set by the hunters. Is this an image of the human in harmony with the natural world? Now, it was those hunters who reported the disruption of civilization back to the king, back to Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh ordered a prostitute named Shamhat to be sent to the wilderness. At the sight of Shamhat, Enkidu stopped in his tracks. The two embraced in a non-stop erotic encounter that lasted for a week. But then, after it ended, Enkidu found that he could no longer run with the animals, who shunned him, and he was no longer as fleet of foot. Something had fundamentally changed, and Shamhat guided him from the wilderness to civilization, and she introduced him to the ways of culture, eating bread, drinking beer, wearing clothing. And note how the story portrays the division between the way of nature and the way of civilization. At first, there is enmity between Enkidu and Gilgamesh, and they fight. But that dissipates, and the two become fast friends. In this new phase of Gilgamesh's life, the pair embark on a heroic journey far beyond the city into the distant wilderness, entering a great cedar forest that is protected by a fierce beast named Humbaba, whom the pair slaughter, and then they plunder the forest, returning to civilization with the spoils of nature, which will be used for various urban projects. Along the way, Gilgamesh caught the eye of Ishtar, the goddess of love and fertility and war, and she wants to make Gilgamesh another one of her husbands. But he rejects her advances, and Enkidu insults her. It is this offense that ultimately brings about the death of Enkidu. Gilgamesh struggles to understand and make sense of this loss, which propels the king into great despair. He wanders in mourning, wearing animal skins beyond the city. And note how the text portrays a movement from civilization to wilderness, from civilized to wild, as he goes through this grieving process. Facing the loss of one whom he loved, Gilgamesh had to reckon with the reality of human mortality, and he desperately sought to find a way out. How can he avoid this fate? And this story shows Gilgamesh's angst and his efforts to overcome and then ultimately to accept his own mortality. And this is a human struggle that we will explore every week hereafter in this course. And so, Gilgamesh sets out on a journey that will provide him with answers. Now, rather than spoil the story here, I'll leave the rest for you. But to assist, let me offer a few thoughts to frame your reading. First, contrast civilization and nature. We see in the story a great urban center and the resources, the human resources and the natural resources, which are required to keep it alive. There are walls and irrigation and agriculture and political hierarchy and labor demands. And consider how this contrasts with some of the other assigned content. Consider the story of the flood that you find in Gilgamesh. Why did the gods want to wipe out humanity, and how did it survive? And contrast this with another flood story that you will soon encounter. Consider also the role of three very prominent women in the text. There's Shamhat, the individual responsible for helping Enkidu transition from wilderness to civilization. And then there's Ishtar, the divine being responsible for keeping the action moving in the story. And then there's Siduri, the barkeeper, who imparts the fundamental wisdom to Gilgamesh. But it's wisdom that cannot be taught secondhand. It only emerges through experience. And then we see, at the end of the tale, she was right all along. More broadly, consider the message that this ancient tale is trying to teach about the inevitability of death and how best to live, knowing the unavoidable end of all of us alike. What is it that makes life worth living? There are answers there in the text. But also consider the text itself as an answer. For story like this epic here, this work of poetry, it offers another clue, and one we see in every culture on earth, that in art and creative expression may be found consolation, inspiration, and meaning.